In every house, there's a place where shadows settle longer than anywhere else. For me, that place was the corner behind the faded blue curtain in our living room. It wasn't more than 3 feet wide, a dusty wedge between the old coal stove and the wooden wall. But it became my refuge, my hiding place, my cell. I'd retreat there after school, after dinner, after the shouting, after the silence. I brought my homework, a flashlight with batteries so weak they barely flickered, and a stack of books I'd borrowed from Ms. Black's classroom shelf. Books that didn't talk about men like my father or women like my mother. Books that spoke of dragons and magic and children who ran away to better worlds. That corner was where I learned to survive, and where I began to forget how to live. There was a kind of ritual to it. I'd step inside quietly, pulling the curtain closed behind me, careful not to let it rustle too loudly. I'd sit cross-legged on the cracked linoleum floor, back against the cold wall, and stay still, so still. Not because I liked it, but because movement invited attention. And in that house, attention was a dangerous thing. Mama knew I was there. She'd pass by and sometimes leave a piece of cornbread or a glass of sweet tea on the floor just outside the curtain, like an offering. We never spoke of it. We never called it hiding, because calling it what it was would have made it real. And reality was unbearable. That little corner became my entire world. I did my homework there, ate dinner there, even napped with my head against my knees when the noise in the house got too loud. When Daddy stumbled in drunk, yelling nonsense about communists and demons and the Lord's judgment, I'd close my eyes and imagine I was somewhere else. A boarding school in the mountains, a lighthouse by the sea, anywhere that wasn't our crumbling house in rural Kentucky. Anywhere I wasn't a girl waiting for the footsteps to stop. I didn't have friends. Not really. There were girls at school who would wave or smile. One named Patsy once tried to invite me to her birthday party, but I told her Mama said no. It was a lie. Mama didn't even know about it. I just couldn't imagine walking into someone else's home and not checking the exits first. I couldn't pretend to be normal, because I wasn't. Normal girls didn't flinch when someone touched their shoulder. Normal girls didn't hide coins under floorboards in case they had to run. Normal girls didn't live like ghosts in their own homes. One day, I dropped a pencil and it rolled past the curtain. I scrambled to grab it before anyone noticed I was there. As I reached out, I locked eyes with Daddy, who was slouched in his chair, sipping from his bottle. He just stared, didn't say anything, didn't move. But that stare, it froze me, told me he knew I was trying to disappear, and somehow that amused him, like a cat watching a bird with clipped wings. That night, I stayed in the corner until dawn. There's a strange comfort in confinement. Creates order, predictability. You know where the walls are. You know what's coming. Freedom, on the other hand, is terrifying, because it means choices. And I hadn't made a choice for myself in years. But even in that small space, something inside me started to shift. The books helped. So did Ms. Black's voice in my head. You're smart, Clara. Don't forget that. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd catch my own reflection in the cracked mirror near the stove, and I wouldn't see a prisoner. I'd see a girl with a plan. A girl who was counting down. A girl who, though small and quiet and invisible now, wouldn't be forever. Still, it would take years before I could leave that corner. Before I'd learn that hiding isn't healing. That silence isn't safety. That sometimes, the only way to break a curse is to step out of the place where it started. Even if your legs shake. Even if your voice cracks. Even if your past follows you out like a shadow. The corner was my prison. But it was also my chrysalis. And one day I would learn how to crawl out and fly. Caleb used to be my hero. When I was small, he'd lift me onto his shoulders so I could reach the mulberries that grew along the edge of our yard. He once punched a boy in church for teasing me about my hand-me-down dress. He showed me how to skip rocks and make paper kites from flour sacks. There were years when I thought no one in the world could hurt me. Not as long as Caleb was near. But after the night everything changed. My brother couldn't even look at me. He came home 3 days after the worst night of my life, his eyes bloodshot, smelling like beer and bonfire smoke. He dropped his duffel bag at the front door like it offended him. Mama hugged him briefly. Daddy didn't say a word. And me? I watched him from behind the curtain. Silent. Still. Unseen. Just like always. At first, I thought he was angry at me. I catch him watching me with that same haunted look Mama wore after every blow to the face. Like he was trying to solve a problem he didn't know how to name. He stopped talking at dinner. Stopped helping around the house. Stopped coming home some nights altogether. Instead, he'd ride off with the older boys to the liquor store across the county line. Or disappear into the woods for hours, returning with a crooked grin and knuckles scabbed from fights he didn't explain. He was unraveling, and I couldn't stop it. One night, I dared to break the silence. I waited until Mama had gone to bed, and Daddy was passed out in his chair. Caleb was sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette. He rolled himself, tapping his boot heel rhythmically on the wooden steps. "Do you hate me?" I asked. He jumped, startled. He hadn't noticed me come out. He turned his head slowly, not looking directly at me.
No.
"Then why won't you talk to me?" He crushed the cigarette under his heel and stood. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk away again, but he didn't. Instead, he sat back down, elbows on his knees, staring at the black sky. "I can't," he said. "Every time I see you, I see what I let happen." His voice cracked. "I should have done something. I should have said no. I should have hit him. I should have dragged you out of that house myself if I had to." I sat down beside him, careful not to touch him. "He would have killed you," I whispered. Maybe that would have been better than living like this." His voice was full of self-loathing. And for the first time, I realized something. Caleb wasn't just avoiding me because of what he'd seen. He was avoiding me because of what he hadn't done. That realization should have brought comfort. But it didn't, because I didn't need his guilt. I needed his strength. And he no longer had any to give. After that night, things didn't improve. He dropped out of school, picked up more shifts at the mill, started drinking in the mornings. Daddy encouraged it, said it was time for Caleb to man up. The two of them would sit together in the living room, passing bottles back and forth like war veterans, laughing at cruel jokes and complaining about lazy women. Sickened me. I wanted to scream, "You were supposed to be better than him." But I didn't, because in our house, screaming didn't mean anything. Then came the night he finally broke. He came home so drunk he could barely stand, collapsed in the kitchen where I was finishing dishes, and started to cry. Not a quiet, embarrassed cry, but a full, guttural, chest-heaving sob. "I'm sorry, Clara," he kept repeating. "I'm sorry I didn't stop him. I'm sorry I wasn't a man." I stood frozen, the dish towel still in my hands. "I should have taken the beating myself. I should have." He trailed off, burying his face in his arms. I didn't know what to say. No words could undo what had been done. So I whispered, "Go sleep, Caleb," and left him there. The next morning, he was gone. He left a note on the table. "Joined the army. Don't look for me." Mama cried for 2 days. Daddy shrugged and said, "Figures. Too soft for real life." I said nothing. I just stood by the window and watched the wind blow dust across the yard. My brother had escaped, and I was still here, alone. I didn't know what was worse, losing him or knowing I'd already lost him long before he left. The loneliness after Caleb left was different than before. Before, it had been tinged with resentment and confusion. Now it was just cold, final. But in that hollow space, something else began to grow. Resolve. Not the kind that makes you fight back right away, but the kind that smolders beneath the skin for years. Waiting, planning, knowing that one day the door would open. And when it did, I wouldn't just walk out. I'd never come back. Hope came in the form of a woman with crow's feet, chalk-stained skirts, and a voice like soft gravel. Ms. Evelyn Black was my English teacher from 6th grade through 8th. Most teachers looked at me and saw what they wanted to see. A shy, quiet girl who followed the rules and did well enough not to cause trouble. But Ms. Black saw through that. She saw the shaking hands, the eyes that flinched when the classroom door slammed, the essays that described a home made of shadows and a room without air. She didn't ask me what happened. She asked me what I loved. No one had ever asked me that before. It started with a poem. We'd been given an assignment to write a free verse piece about a place that feels safe. Most of the kids wrote about their bedrooms, the treehouse behind the Johnsons' farm, or their grandparents' porch. I wrote about a library I'd never been to, a grand, sunlit place with tall ceilings and rows upon rows of books, where silence was not fearful but sacred. I wrote about reading until the outside world disappeared, about curling up in a chair that felt like arms, about the weight of a hardbound novel that promised escape. I handed it in, expecting a red X or a polite comment. What I got instead was a note written in looping cursive. "You have a voice, Clara, and it's powerful. Come see me after class." That afternoon, I lingered as the other students filed out. Ms. Black handed me a slim book with a navy blue cover. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. This is a story about a girl who grows up poor and invisible, and survives. I held the book like it was made of glass. "You should read it. I think you'll see yourself." I took it home and finished it in 2 nights, curled in my corner, flashlight in one hand and Kleenex in the other. I wept when Francie's father died. I cheered when she got her library card. I underlined entire paragraphs with a broken pencil stub. I returned it the next week, eyes shining. And from that day on, Ms. Black gave me a book every Monday. Books became more than escape. They became instruction on how to feel, how to name things, how to imagine a life beyond the one I had. We read Maya Angelou, Shirley Jackson, and Walt Whitman. She let me borrow her personal copies, worn and annotated with notes in the margins like whispers from another soul. Sometimes, she would pause while writing on the chalkboard and glance back at me with a knowing look. Not pity, not concern, recognition. But she didn't stop at literature. One day, Ms. Black offered me a small envelope. "There's a family over on Miller's farm who needs help with their youngest, struggling with reading. I thought you might want to tutor him." "I've never taught anyone," I said. "You've taught yourself," she replied. "That's harder." I took the job. 50 cents an hour and a cold glass of lemonade each Saturday afternoon. It was the first time I'd ever earned money for something other than scrubbing floors or folding laundry. I began to believe that maybe I could be more than a ghost behind a curtain. Maybe I could be someone who gave something, who meant something. Tutoring led to more families asking for help. Ms. Black helped me manage my schedule, taught me how to organize lesson plans, and, one afternoon, told me something that changed my world. "There's a scholarship at Covington Academy for girls like you." I blinked. Like me. Smart, resilient, hungry for more. I laughed bitterly. Hungry, maybe, but I'm not like them. They're rich. I'm. "Don't finish that sentence," she said gently. "Let me make some calls." In the weeks that followed, Ms. Black became my advocate. She filled out forms, mailed letters, arranged meetings. She walked with me every step of the way, never pushing, always supporting. And then one day, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "They've accepted you, Clara. Full scholarship. Books, meals, uniforms. All of it." For a moment, the room spun. I had never imagined a life beyond the county line. Never imagined I could be part of something bigger. I cried right there in her classroom. For the first time, not from pain, but from possibility. When I told Mama, she was torn between fear and pride. When I told Daddy, he grunted and said, "As long as it don't cost me anything." That was permission enough. Ms. Black stayed after school with me every day that summer, prepping me for what was to come. How to speak with confidence, how to shake hands, how to walk like I belonged in a place where no one had ever said my name before. "You won't fit in at first," she said, "but you will matter." Before my first day at Covington, she gave me a new journal. Inside the cover, she had written, "To Clara, may you never forget the power of your words and the world they can build." She was the first adult who ever believed in me without condition. Not because I was useful, not because I was obedient, but because I was me. And for the first time, I believed it too. Once the letter came from Covington Academy, our house changed, quietly, invisibly, but undeniably. It wasn't just the scholarship. It was what it meant. That someone like me, from a place like ours, might one day leave, might escape. And in homes like ours, hope is dangerous. It threatens the balance. It stirs the dust. Mama folded the acceptance letter neatly and hid it inside her sewing kit, between spools of navy thread and dull silver needles. I memorized every word of it. We are pleased to offer full academic sponsorship. Like scripture. I whispered it to myself at night, like a promise. But we both knew something Daddy didn't. This wasn't going to end with just a school. This was going to be my way out. Mama started writing letters. Always at night, after Daddy passed out in his chair and the kitchen had been scrubbed clean of both food and conflict. She'd sit at the table in the faint glow of a kerosene lamp, pressing the pen so hard the tip tore the paper. She wrote to her younger brother, my Uncle Raymond, a man I barely remembered, a Marine stationed in Jacksonville, Florida. She hadn't written him in years. Daddy wouldn't allow it, but she wrote anyway. Every letter was folded and passed to our neighbor, Mrs. Clara, an old widow who ran errands into town and mailed them on Mama's behalf. Mrs. Cora never asked questions. Maybe she knew. Maybe she'd once lived in a house like ours. The letters were full of coded language. Clara's doing well. She may be traveling soon for school. We may have a chance to change the scenery. Please, Ray, let me know if you still have that spare room. A month later, the first letter came back. Yes, the room was still there. Yes, he'd take us in. Yes, he would come for us. Quietly, quickly, without a word to anyone. Mama didn't cry. She just nodded and said, "Now we plan." I began preparing. Not with luggage, but with silence. I cleaned harder than ever. I did my chores without complaint. I disappeared behind my curtain each night without sound. I made myself smaller, more invisible, so Daddy wouldn't suspect anything. And I began to save. Ms. Black had arranged for me to tutor 2 more students after school. Children of a retired dentist who paid me 50 cents an hour and always sent me home with a slice of pie. I pocketed every coin, hid them in an old candy tin, and buried it under the floorboard beneath my bed. By September, I had nearly $9 saved. Felt like a fortune. Felt like freedom. The plan was simple. On a Sunday, while Daddy was at the bar watching football, Uncle Raymond would pull up 2 streets over. Mama and I would walk out with 2 small bags, nothing too obvious. We'd be gone before Daddy even realized. Mama would leave a note on the kitchen table. "Don't come looking. We're not yours anymore." But plans, especially ones made in silence, are fragile things. They can crumble with the slam of a screen door, or the whisper of a neighbor. It happened 2 days before our planned escape. Daddy came home early, drunk, furious, shouting about women who think they're smarter than they are, and whores who send letters behind their husband's back. We froze. He threw Mama's sewing kit across the room. The acceptance letter fell out. He crushed it under his boot. Then he turned to Mama and backhanded her so hard she hit the table. "You think you can run?" he roared. "I'll kill you before I let you leave me." I hid in my corner, trembling. For a moment I thought he would come for me. But he didn't. He stormed out instead, probably back to the bar, to scream his shame into a bottle. When the door slammed behind him, Mama stood up, her lip bleeding, one eye already swelling shut. She didn't cry. She looked at me and said, "We leave tonight." I tried to argue. "Uncle's not coming until Sunday. We don't wait. He knows our plan now, and he's angry enough to follow through." She wiped the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. "Grab your things, Clara. We'll find a way." We rushed through the house gathering what little we needed. A change of clothes, the money, my school books, Mama's wedding photo of her parents. The only thing she ever kept from her childhood. She put it in her apron pocket like a shield. Then she knocked on Mrs. Cora's door and asked to borrow her telephone. "I need to call someone to come now," Mama said. Mrs. Cora didn't hesitate. Uncle Raymond answered on the 3rd ring. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Give me 4 hours." Those 4 hours felt like a lifetime. We sat in the dark, bags at our feet, listening for Daddy's truck. Every creak of the porch boards, every passing headlight outside, made my breath catch. I don't know how we made it through without breaking. But we did. At 1:14 a.m., a navy blue pickup truck pulled into our driveway, and Uncle Raymond stepped out, wearing his Marine jacket, fists clenched, eyes sharp. "I came to take my family home," he said. That was the first night I ever saw Daddy run. He opened the door, saw Raymond, and for the first time in my life he backed away. Didn't shout, didn't swing, just faded into the dark like the coward he truly was. Mama and I walked out, bags in hand. I didn't look back. I never would. The night Daddy found out was not the night we left. It was the night we almost didn't. The plan had been carefully woven in whispers and glances, in silent nods and folded letters. We thought we had time. 2 more days to pack memories into bags and tuck our courage beneath our clothes. But monsters don't wait for timing. They strike when your back is turned. And mine was turned, bending down, folding clothes quietly in my corner, when I heard the door slam like a shotgun blast. He was home. Too early. Too drunk. Too angry. His boots thundered down the hallway, each step a countdown. I froze. My curtain didn't feel thick enough. My breath didn't feel quiet enough. Mama was out hanging sheets in the backyard. She couldn't stop him. "Elizabeth!" His voice cracked through the house like lightning. I heard her hurry back inside. "I'm here, Samuel," she said quickly. "I'll warm up supper." "Supper?" He spat. "That what you think this is about?" There was a pause. Then, the sound of paper being crumpled. My heart stopped. He had the letter. I couldn't see them, but I didn't need to. I knew the script. "You been writing to your damn brother behind my back?" "No, it's not." "You planning to run off? Take the girl? Think I wouldn't find out?" He was roaring now. The slap came next. Then a crash, maybe a chair. Maybe Mama herself. I pressed both hands over my ears, but I could still hear every word. "Joe from the bar said he saw you talking to the bus driver, asking about Atlanta. Goddamn Joe. Nosy old drunk. He'd probably sold Mama's secret for the price of a pint." I couldn't stay hidden. I pushed past the curtain, shaking. Mama was on the floor, face bleeding. Daddy stood above her, red-faced, fists clenched. "Stop!" I shouted. He turned. His eyes were wild, bloodshot and glassy, but sharp. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look who decided to show up." He stepped toward me. "You think you're smart? Gonna run off to some fancy school? Gonna be better than me?" His hand reached out, grabbed my arm hard. I winced. "You're mine, girl."
Mine.
"You don't leave unless I say so." And then Mama stood up.
No trembling.
No stammering. Just fire. She stepped between us, her voice like a knife. "Don't touch her, Samuel." He blinked, confused, staggered back. "What did you say?" I said don't touch her. Not ever again. It was the first time in my life I'd heard her speak to him like that. The first time she didn't sound like prey. And for a moment he didn't know what to do. That moment saved us. A knock thundered on the door. Not a polite knock. Not a neighborly knock. Commanding knock. Daddy turned, startled. I looked past him and saw the shadow on the porch. "Who the hell?" He yanked the door open. And there stood Uncle Raymond, wearing his Marine jacket, broad-shouldered, eyes like steel. He didn't wait for permission. He walked in. "You must be Samuel," he said, cool and slow. Daddy squared his shoulders. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Raymond didn't flinch. "I'm Elizabeth's brother, and I'm here to take her and the girl." "You're not taking anyone," Daddy snapped. Raymond looked at Mama, at me, at the bruises on her face, at the grip mark on my arm. He turned back to Daddy, then punched him so hard he flew into the hallway wall. The sound was sickening. Bone on bone. Daddy slid down the wall like wet laundry. Raymond grabbed him by the collar and lifted him again. "That's for the broken teeth she never fixed." Another punch. "For the bruises she hid." Another punch. "For the child you turned into a ghost." Another. Daddy whimpered, begged. And for the first time I didn't feel afraid of him. I felt sorry for him, because the real man in the room wasn't the one with the fists. It was the one protecting us. "Let's go," Raymond said, voice flat.
Mama nodded.
We grabbed the bags. Quiet.
Fast.
Raymond looked at Daddy. Crumpled, bleeding, still alive, and spit at his feet. If you come near them again, I'll bury you in your own yard. We stepped into the night. A full moon hung above the trees. Mrs. Cora stood on her porch, watching silently, hand over her heart. She didn't wave, didn't call out, but her eyes followed us like a prayer. We drove through the hills in silence. I sat in the truck bed, wind tearing at my hair, the stars blinking above like they were bearing witness. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just held Mama's hand and breathed, deeply, freely. For the first time in my life, Atlanta didn't smell like home. It smelled like gasoline, concrete, and something electric in the air, like new beginnings buzzing just out of reach. The city hummed at all hours, restless, impatient. For a girl who grew up listening to silence as a survival skill, the noise was overwhelming. But it was also comforting, because for once, the loudest sound wasn't a slurred insult or a slammed door. It was possibility. Uncle Raymond's house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees and tidy yards. It wasn't big, but it was solid, real floors, a roof that didn't leak, and rooms with doors that locked. He gave Mama the bedroom and set up a cot for me in the spare room, which was filled with military books, a broken treadmill, and a poster of Elvis from his Korea tour. "It's not much," he said, scratching his neck, "but it's yours." He didn't know it, but it was the nicest thing anyone had ever given me. Mama didn't speak much in those first weeks. She floated through the house like she was afraid to touch anything. She cleaned too much, cooked for 3 like she was feeding 10. The day Uncle Raymond brought home groceries, she cried over a box of cereal, not because it was sweet, but because it was just for her.
No strings. No punishment.
No fear, just food. She cried again the first time she slept a full night without waking. And again when I left my curtain folded in a drawer and chose a room with a door instead. I enrolled at North Atlanta High 2 weeks after we arrived. It wasn't like Covington. No marble floors or polished uniforms. But it was safe. The teachers looked me in the eye. The girls wore lip gloss and wrote notes on pastel paper. No one cared where I came from. No one knew what I carried. Except one girl, Jennifer Wallace. She was the pharmacist's daughter, brilliant, bold, and with the kind of loud laugh that made teachers pause mid-lecture. She sat next to me in English class and asked to borrow a pencil. That was all it took. She didn't ask questions about my past. Just started eating lunch with me. Dragged me to the library. Let me talk about books instead of pain. "You draw?" she asked one day, noticing my notebook. I shrugged. "Let me see." I showed her a sketch of a little house in the woods. Tiny, hidden, but with big windows and flowers on the roof. "This looks like freedom," she whispered. Jennifer was the first friend I ever had who didn't need saving, and didn't try to save me. She just stood with me, and sometimes that's everything. I started tutoring again, this time for Mrs. Williams down the street. Her 2 kids needed help with reading. She paid in cash and fresh biscuits. I saved every dollar in a coffee can under my cot. I didn't know what I was saving for anymore, but saving meant preparing, and that made me feel less afraid. Mama, meanwhile, began to transform. She started baking more than just cornbread. Cobblers, pies, butter rolls. Word spread fast. A neighbor ordered a cherry pie for his daughter's birthday. Then someone else asked for a peach tart. Before long, Mama had a list on the fridge. Orders, pickup times, special requests. She laughed when people complimented her crust. She laughed. I hadn't heard that sound since I was a child. Uncle Raymond was quiet, but steady. He taught me how to change a tire, how to open a bank account, and how to punch a man in the throat if he ever tries something. He never asked about Daddy, never said his name. But sometimes, when the news was bad or the house was quiet too long, he'd grip the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He carried his own ghosts, but he never let them bleed into us. In October, my art teacher, Mrs. Reeves, called me after class. "You ever think about architecture?" she asked, pointing to one of my sketches. "No," I said truthfully. "Well, you should. She gave me a pamphlet for Georgia State School of Architecture. They've got a scholarship program. And with your grades, your story. She stopped herself. You'd be a hell of a candidate. That night, I stared at the pamphlet until the words blurred. Architecture. Designing spaces. Creating structures that didn't hurt. Rooms that welcomed. Corners that protected instead of imprisoning. Felt impossible. But so had escape. And look where I was. So I made a list. Step 1, finish high school. Step 2, apply for every scholarship I could find. Step 3, build something better. That night I told Mama. She looked at me the way she used to look at the sky before a storm. Nervous, hopeful, afraid of what could go wrong, but more afraid of what might happen if we stopped dreaming. You'll do it, she said, folding the pamphlet. You'll build a life no one can tear down. And I believed her, because I'd already survived the demolition. Now it was time to lay the foundation. The first time I stood inside the Georgia State University Architecture Building, I felt like I'd stepped into another universe. The walls were tall and white, the floors gleamed, and the air smelled like coffee, ink, and ambition. Everyone walked fast, carrying portfolios the size of windows, their eyes full of sleep and ideas. I clutched my sketchbook like a lifeline, my heart pounding with a single thought. I don't belong here, but that was a lie, because I'd earned every step that brought me to that doorway. And I was done letting fear build my boundaries. I was accepted into the School of Architecture on a full scholarship, thanks to grades, letters of recommendation, and a personal essay that I rewrote 15 times until it didn't sound like begging. Instead of pleading, I wrote the truth. I wrote about spaces that hurt and spaces that healed. I wrote about corners that became prisons and blueprints that became freedom. I wrote about wanting to build homes that never needed hiding places. Jennifer was accepted to pharmacy like her dad. She hugged me at the bus stop, whispering, "Told you we'd make it." Uncle Raymond drove me to campus my first day. He didn't say much, just handed me an envelope when I got out of the truck. "For books," he grunted. Inside was $100 in 20s. Money I knew he didn't have to spare. Mama packed my lunch that morning like I was still in high school. She slipped a note into the bag that said, "I'm proud of you, baby." I kept it in my wallet for years. The classes were hard. So hard. Engineering, math, physics, computer modeling. Some of the other students had parents who were architects or engineers. I had Mama's peach cobbler and Ms. Black's voice in my head saying, "You have a voice. Use it." I stayed up until 3 a.m. more nights than I can count, building models out of foam board and gluing my fingers together. I failed my first drafting quiz. I aced the second one. Slowly, painfully, I began to rise. I worked part-time as a tutor and later as an assistant in the design lab, cleaning equipment and organizing supplies for upperclassmen. One of them was Michael. He was tall, quiet, and always had pencil shavings on his shirt. He worked 3 jobs and still stayed late in the studio every night. "You draw like you've lived 100 lives," he said once, looking over my shoulder at a concept I was sketching. An open-air shelter for women and children. "You build like you remember pain," I replied. We didn't talk about our pasts. We just understood each other. Michael and I became partners for a group project in second year, an eco-housing proposal for rural Georgia. As we built the model together, something else started to take shape. A quiet understanding. A mutual respect. One night, while we waited for glue to dry on a tiny roof frame, I told him about my dream, to build a community center back home. A place where girls like I was can go when they need to feel safe. He didn't laugh. He didn't pity me. He said, "Let's start sketching." At home, Mama's business was growing. She was selling baked goods at church, at school fundraisers, even to a few small cafes. She still wore the same apron, but her steps were lighter. One afternoon during break, I came home and found her standing in the kitchen, covered in flour, beaming. "I bought a mixer," she said. "Brand new. Cash. Can you believe it?" I hugged her with hands still stained with charcoal. It felt like we were both building something together, just with different tools. By my third year, I had an internship at a local firm. I wore secondhand blazers and rode the bus every day, carrying my designs in a tote Mama had sewn herself. I learned how to pitch, how to fail, how to try again. One day, while presenting a design for a transitional shelter, one of the partners asked, "Where'd this idea come from?" I looked at the blueprints, the soft curves, the lack of corners, the skylights that let the sun in no matter where you stood. And I said, "I used to live in a place with no light. I wanted to build the opposite." He nodded. "You'll go far, kid." That night, I stood at my bedroom window and stared out over the city. I thought about the girl in the corner behind the curtain, the one who couldn't speak, the one who flinched at every sound. She would never believe this version of me, but I wasn't building for her approval. I was building for her freedom. The blueprints were just the beginning. Soon there would be walls, and windows, and doors that only opened outward. By the time I graduated, I no longer dreamed of escape. I dreamed of return. Not to the house where my nightmares lived. Not to the shadows I'd left behind. But to the people who still lived in places like that. The girls behind curtains. The mothers who whispered instead of spoke. The families who needed blueprints not just for buildings but for hope. Michael and I started our own firm 6 months after graduation. Harper and Williams, he insisted, even though I tried to put his name first. "You built this long before I showed up," he said. "I'm just lucky to draw beside you." Our first project wasn't glamorous. A community center on the outskirts of Decatur. A place for after-school tutoring, job support, and free legal aid for women fleeing domestic violence. We worked 12-hour days, called in every favor we had, and maxed out 3 credit cards. But when it opened, full of light, color, and corners that comforted instead of confined, I saw a mother cry in the doorway. Her daughter clutched a brand new backpack and whispered, "Is this ours?" That's when I knew. I was home, because home isn't where you're from. It's where you're safe. It's where you're heard. It's where you get to build something better. Mama was our first client. She needed a new kitchen. Not just any kitchen, a bakery. We designed it together, down to the custom shelves for her flour tins and the special light fixture she'd always wanted. It was the size of a single-car garage, but to her it was Versailles. She cried when we unveiled it. "This isn't just a kitchen," she whispered. "It's the first place I've ever felt free." When the Atlanta Journal did a piece on our work with community design, I was nervous. I still wasn't used to being seen. I still carried the voice of my father somewhere in the back of my mind, telling me I wasn't smart, wasn't useful, wasn't enough. But when the article came out, there was a photo of me standing beside a model of our latest shelter project. The caption read, "Architect Sarah Williams, building safe spaces from the ground up." Mama cut it out and taped it above the stove. "Every girl should see this," she said. Michael proposed one spring afternoon, on the front porch of our new home. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet question during a lunch break. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "The kind we never had. Want to draw the plans with me?" I said yes before he finished. We got married in Mama's garden, surrounded by neighbors, friends, and the smell of fresh peach cobbler. Uncle Raymond walked me down the aisle, his Marine uniform pressed crisp as ever. When the officiant said, "Who gives this woman away?" Raymond replied, "No one gives her away. She walks on her own. We're just proud to walk beside her." We built our house ourselves. Modern, modest, full of glass and light. No locks on bedroom doors. No corners for hiding. A fireplace in the living room, and a big table where everyone could eat at once. It was the kind of place where laughter echoed instead of fists. Our children grew up in that house. Emma, who became a writer. Thomas, who became a teacher. And every year we opened our home on Thanksgiving to young women in our firm who were far from their families. Interns. Students. Survivors. They'd sit around the table, sip Mama's cider, and ask about the photographs on the wall. "That's the first center we ever built," I'd say. "That's your grandmother's bakery. That's the window I dreamed of having as a child." Sometimes, when the wind was quiet, I'd think of Madison. I never went back, not even when Daddy died. Mama did, just once, to collect some documents and bury the past. She stood at the threshold of that house and said a prayer. Not for forgiveness, for finality. She never spoke of him again. And neither did I. But I kept the curtain. The blue one from my corner. I stitched it into a quilt for my daughter's bed. Not to forget where I came from, but to show how far I'd traveled. Some people inherit houses. Some inherit land. I inherited pain but turned it into purpose. I took broken bricks and built bridges. I took silence and turned it into story. I took the girl I used to be and built her a life she never thought she'd live. And now I tell that story, because maybe there's another girl out there right now, hiding in a corner behind a curtain, thinking she's invisible. To her I say, you are not what happened to you. You are what you build from it. I used to believe survival was just about getting through the day. One breath after another. One foot in front of the other. But survival, I've come to learn, is more than endurance. It's design. A deliberate act of shaping what you have into what you need. Of building something solid from what tried to break you. It's blueprints made from memory. Courage laid brick by brick. And dreams used as mortar. Survival is architecture. And I've been an architect my whole life. Even before I knew the word. I've built shelters with clean lines and curved walls that don't echo the sound of raised voices. I've helped design halfway homes for women and children where the locks are on the inside, and the light switches don't spark, and every room has a window. I've spoken in schools and at conferences, telling people how a house is never just walls. It's psychology, it's memory, it's identity. A child raised in fear doesn't need more rules. She needs light. She needs room to breathe. She needs someone to think about where the closet is, so it doesn't become a hiding place. She needs an architect who's lived her story. I never say my father's name when I speak publicly. Not because I'm afraid, but because he doesn't deserve the echo. I speak about survival, not victimhood. About legacy, not lineage. About how my mother taught me resilience. How my uncle taught me protection. How women like Ms. Black and friends like Jennifer taught me belief. And how I now teach others that survival is not the end of the story. It's the foundation. I mentor young girls from places like Madison. Girls who walk into my office with hunched shoulders and eyes that search the exits. I give them internships, recommend books, listen more than I speak. And when they finally open up, about the uncle who got too close, the father who drank too much, the boyfriend who left bruises, I don't flinch. I say, you are not broken. You are in the process of becoming. And I mean every word. Michael and I still live in the house we built together. He has his drafting studio in the back. I have my reading nook by the window. A chair that wraps around me like arms, just like the ones I imagined in that essay so long ago. Our grandchildren visit in the summers. They call me Nana Blue, because I always wear the same soft cardigan. The one with the deep blue cuffs that remind me of that curtain. The one that held space for me when nothing else did. Mama passed away surrounded by the people she loved. She died with a pie in the oven, jazz on the radio, and my hand in hers. She whispered, "We did it, baby." And I whispered back, "Yes, we did." There's a quote I keep framed in my office. It's not famous. It's just something I wrote in a notebook at 16. I am not what they did to me. I am what I build in spite of it. That's the blueprint I live by. That's the architecture of survival. To anyone hearing this now, to any girl sitting behind a curtain, holding her breath, waiting for the noise to stop, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not what they tried to make. You are what comes next. You are the plan. You are the blue. You are the house. And one day you will be the home someone else runs to. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. We share real stories of real women who fought through darkness and came out radiant. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your words matter here. You matter here. Until next time, may your walls be strong. May your roof be steady. And may your heart always feel like home. Dove. The porch creaked gently beneath my weight as I rocked back and forth on the old swing, watching the sun settle beyond the fields like a curtain falling on the last act of a long, complicated play. The wind smelled like pine and old tobacco, Insects hummed in the grass. And the house behind me, white, small, wrapped in ivy and thyme, stood still as if holding its breath. I am Clara May Whitmore, 74 years old, and I have a story to tell. Not because I need pity, not because I want revenge, but because if I don't speak it, no one will. And I've learned, far too late, that silence is often the cruelest accomplice. The camera in front of me blinked its red light. My granddaughter Emma had set it up before she left for her nursing shift at the county clinic. "Just talk, Grandma," she'd said. "Talk like you do with me." So I did. I began to talk. And this is what I said. You see, folks look at an old woman on a porch and they think they're seeing peace. Wisdom, maybe softness. But what they rarely see, what they almost never imagine, is the war we've survived to get here. The nights we didn't think we'd make it to morning. The voices that said we weren't worth saving. The bodies we dragged, our own, out of places no child should be. They don't see the scars under the sweater sleeves, or the ghosts we feed quietly with coffee and silence each dawn. But I see them, because I was one, and I still am. I was born in the summer of 1948 in rural Kentucky, in a house that smelled like kerosene, sweat, and whatever was cooking in the iron pot hanging over the fire. My daddy, Earl Whitmore, was a carpenter with hands like bricks and a mouth full of whiskey. My mama, June, was soft-spoken and thinner every year, a woman who folded in on herself like wet laundry. I had one brother, Caleb, 3 years older, strong, handsome in the way that made girls whisper, but his eyes were always watching something far away, like he was trying to leave without moving. People said we were a quiet family. They didn't know that quiet meant survival, that in our house noise got punished, tears got mocked, and a girl's voice wasn't worth the breath it used. The first time I realized I was invisible, I was 9. I'd cut my knee open climbing a fence, blood dripping down to my sock, crying because it hurt and because I was scared I'd done something wrong. Mama looked at me, then looked away. Daddy looked at me and looked hungry. That was the beginning. Not the beginning of the violence that had been there long before me, but the beginning of my understanding, of what I was, of what I wasn't, and of how alone I was going to be for a very long time. I didn't tell anyone back then. Who would I tell? The preacher's wife who said, "God gives burdens to the strong"? The school nurse who whispered that girls like me were troublemakers? Or my mother, who couldn't even protect herself? No, I learned to keep it in. To press my lips together so hard they bled, to smile so wide my jaw ached, to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and I'm sorry, even when I didn't know what I'd done. I became so good at silence that I forgot what my voice sounded like, until years later when I found it again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That house in Kentucky is gone now, burned in a lightning storm 10 years after I left. People say it was an accident, but I wonder. Some places are cursed so long, they burn themselves down just to be free. Tonight, I'm not telling this story for my own sake. I've lived it already. I've endured it. I've built a life from the rubble. I'm telling it for the girl who's still in the corner of the room, for the boy too afraid to speak, for the woman who thinks it's too late to change anything. It's not too late. It's never too late. Even if the sun's already setting and your bones ache from all you've carried, I promise, there's still time to become more than your pain, more than your past, more than what they tried to reduce you to. This is my story, and it begins not with violence but with a porch, because sometimes the place you return to in the end is the place you were always meant to leave behind. The house I grew up in stood at the edge of a dirt road that cut through a hollow in western Kentucky like a scar. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a front room that pretended to be a living space but mostly served as a battleground. We had no insulation, no plumbing in the early years, and no real walls, just thin boards nailed together like a lie told too often. But it wasn't the size of the house that made it suffocating. It was the silence, and the fear that hung in the air like tobacco smoke. Our house didn't have laughter. It had rules. It had eyes that watched and fists that spoke louder than words. You could feel the dread the moment you stepped inside, like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. And it always did. Daddy worked at the sawmill, but he hated the job. He came home coated in sawdust and bad moods, already 3 whiskeys deep. By the time he reached the porch, the bottle in his hand was warm, and so was his temper. Mama would stand in the kitchen, hands wringing the hem of her apron, waiting for the slam of the screen door that signaled he'd arrived. He always slammed it, like he wanted the world to know it owed him something. Mama tried to keep things quiet when he was home. Dinner hot, floors swept, radio off. But it didn't matter. Quiet didn't protect us. If the corn was too soft, she got slapped. If the dog barked too loud, he kicked it. If I looked at him wrong, he'd narrow his eyes and say, "You trying to act smart, girl?" I learned not to look up. My brother Caleb had learned all this before me. He was older and quicker to adapt. He knew how to make himself small without disappearing. Knew how to read the tension in Daddy's shoulders, how to slip out the back door before the storm hit. But me, I was slower, softer, and I was a girl. Girls didn't get warnings. They got punished. I was 11 when the smell of fear became permanent. It was summer, the air thick as molasses. I'd missed school that morning with a stomach ache, and when Daddy came home early from the mill, I knew we were in trouble. Mama tried to shield me, told him I was sick, but her voice trembled, and that only made it worse. He shouted from the hallway before he even saw her. "I don't want to hear you pampering this girl who skipped school." Mama looked at me, then back at the door, torn, and like always, fear won. She left me in my little corner of the house. Behind the curtain I called my safe place, and went to him. I heard his voice rising, hers dropping. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I already knew the script. He accused. She apologized. For things she never did. That night, Caleb didn't come home. I found out later he'd gone to stay with a friend. Said he couldn't take it anymore. And just like that, I was alone with my father. And my trauma. For the next 3 days, I couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't sleep without feeling like my skin was screaming. Mama told the teacher I had a virus. She wasn't wrong. My body was rejecting something. But it wasn't illness. It was memory. When Caleb came back, he couldn't look at me. He walked through the house like I wasn't there. In the rare moments our eyes met, there was shame in his face. Maybe guilt. Maybe anger. Maybe both. Maybe I reminded him of something he wanted to forget. And Daddy? He just acted like nothing had happened. He whistled while shaving, kissed Mama on the cheek, told Caleb, "You're becoming a real man now, son." And that was it. Like our lives hadn't cracked open and spilled something dark and irreversible on the kitchen floor. Looking back, I think that was the moment I stopped being a child. Not when I was hit, not even when I was touched, but when I realized no one was coming. That the adults in my life were either powerless or complicit. That the people who were supposed to protect you could be the ones you needed protection from. That's when childhood ended. And a long, terrible kind of survival began. There was no rescue in that house. No safe word. No, this isn't your fault. Just the smell of fear in the walls. And a girl who learned to breathe it in so deeply, she forgot what clean air felt like. There are things you stop saying when your words fall into black holes. First, you try. You say, "Please, no, stop." It hurts. But those words don't land. They don't change anything. They float in the room for a moment, heavy with hope, and then vanish like they were never spoken. So you learn to stop using them. You start using other languages. The language of eyes cast downward. The language of footsteps that barely make a sound. The language of disappearing, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. That's the language I spoke for years. The language of silence. After that day, the one that left something inside me cracked and leaking, I stopped asking questions. Stopped answering them too. At school, I was the quiet one. The girl who used to raise her hand for every spelling bee now barely looked up from her desk. I stopped laughing at recess. Stopped sitting with the other girls at lunch. I sat by the window. Always the window. Because even if I couldn't leave, I needed to see something that could. My teacher, Ms. Black, noticed. "Clara, you're different lately," she said one day after class. Her voice was gentle but firm, like someone trying to coax a bird out of a trap. I nodded, said nothing. Is everything okay at home? I didn't even flinch. I'd already rehearsed this. Smile, nod, say, I'm just tired, ma'am, because telling the truth meant consequences. Not just punishment, but exposure. And exposure to someone like me felt worse than pain. Because what if she didn't believe me? Or worse, what if she did, and still couldn't do anything? Couldn't risk it. At night, the nightmares came like wolves. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping like I was drowning. Sometimes I screamed loud enough to wake Mama. She'd come running, hold me tight, whisper things like, hush, now, it's just a bad dream. But she never asked what it was about. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't want to know. Because knowing meant doing something. And doing something meant risking the little piece we had left. So she stayed quiet. And so did I. Eventually, silence became normal. I didn't even notice when it took over my entire life. When I started flinching every time a man raised his voice. When I couldn't eat dinner without nausea. When I avoided mirrors because I didn't want to see a face I couldn't recognize anymore. The Clara I used to be. The curious, talkative, barefoot girl who sang while hanging laundry. She was gone. She'd crawled into a hidden corner of my soul and shut the door behind her. And I didn't know how to get her back. Caleb stayed distant. At 18, he started drinking. Slowly at first, then often. He mimicked Daddy's habits like they were inherited. The way he walked, the way he spit, the way he talked about women like they were furniture with legs. But he wasn't happy. I could see it in the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. In the way he avoided me like I was radioactive. One night, he came home drunk and collapsed in the kitchen chair while I was washing dishes. I'm sorry, he slurred. I didn't answer. I should have protected you. I should have. He started crying. A grown man sobbing like a little boy. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't, because I was still that little girl, frozen in time, and he had been the one who looked away. I whispered, "Go to bed, Caleb," and I left the room before he could say anything else. I told myself I didn't care, but that night I cried too. Cried for him, for Mama, for me, for all the broken people in that house trying to survive a war they never signed up for. Years passed like this, silent, numb, routine. I woke before dawn to avoid Daddy. Came home, did my chores in absolute silence. Hid behind my curtain. Slept with one eye open. Dreamed in screams. But even then, a part of me began to listen for something. For a voice. For a chance. For a crack in the wall. For anything that might remind me I was still human. Because I may have been silent. But I was still listening. Still waiting. Still hoping. That someday someone might speak my language. And help me find the words again.